Hey everybody, welcome back. I wanted to talk about my experience with jail food. And no, I wasn't in jail. I was never incarcerated. I was on the other side. I worked in the jail for 10 years, and I just wanted to share my experience on the food there. And just the food alone, there's a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people wouldn't want to go to jail or prison, but just based on the food alone, I think that would be enough. I was talking to my best friend about it, and we were said like, yeah, that would be enough motivation for us to stay out of jail. And the food, I don't know how other jails, other prisons work. The food that we got as employees was a little better. It was different than the food the inmates got. The food the inmates got was really terrible. I never tried it. I never saw it. Just smelling it, hearing about it was enough for me. I know they did get a lot of beans, a lot of cabbage, things like that. Not real bacon, but they get like turkey bacon, like imitate. Even for Thanksgiving, they did get turkey, but it wasn't like real turkey. It was like deli turkey that was roasted and sliced up. So yeah, it was pretty bad. I know the food they gave us was pretty bad, and along with the way the food was, it wasn't so much. I mean, the quality of food wasn't that great, but they also had they were not good cooks. They had inmates preparing the, well, they also had a contracted company preparing the food, but they had inmates called trustees that worked in the kitchen preparing the food. And some people, just based on that alone, they said like, oh, these inmates are probably, I think somebody got a hair in their food one day. It was probably from an inmate. And someone said like, oh, I don't trust those inmates. They could be doing stuff to our food. They may not be washed. They're probably not washing their hands properly, and never had any issues. But the food was pretty terrible. As I said, it got to the point where when I first started there, I wasn't making a whole lot. My wife and I weren't making a whole lot of money, so I was trying to save as much money as possible. Even the food wasn't that good, I was eating it to save money. And then it got to the point where, not that much, but it was still garbage, dog food. But they were started charging us for it. They went back and forth. They said, oh, you have to pay now. It was like $1.50, and then they said, oh, it's free. You don't have to pay. Depending upon what was going on in the economy, it was like, oh, it's free now. And then they started charging again. It was like $1.55, and I think, yeah, first it used to be like all you could eat, but then like the portions were, like, there was somebody up there, and then we would serve you like one portion. The portions were pretty limited, but it wasn't so much the quality of the food was pretty bad, but their preparation methods were terrible. Like they would have carrots on the salad bar for salads, but they wouldn't peel them. They would just cut up the carrots into strips or slice them up, and you could see like the skin was still on there. They were like brown on the outside. And they would make a lot of chili, a lot of tacos, things like that, with ground beef, but they wouldn't drain the fat off. It's like, isn't that like common sense with cooking to drain the fat off of ground beef? But I guess not. It was so disgusting just seeing like the layer of fat on there. Ugh. Um, a lot of the officers do this, the correctional officers do the stress of the job. They already had high, but a lot of them were big drinkers, smokers. They didn't live very healthy lifestyles, didn't eat really well, but the food was always so salty, so heavy on onions. They were always like having, a lot of them had like gas problems, and then they were having like they were constantly coming down to the medical department, which is where I worked. I was a medical records clerk in this jail. And they were constantly coming down there to get their blood pressure checked. And yeah, even the food was so salty. Like one time I tried, someone said, oh, how was lunch, Jeff? And I think it was, I forget what it was, but it was something with gravy. I think it might have been meatloaf with gravy, and the gravy was like a mouthful of salt. I said, oh, it was, same as usual, really salty. And so I could feel my blood pressure going up as I was eating it. And yeah, it was really poor quality. They had officers, I think it was the same week as like Nurses Week or Teacher Appreciation Week. I know it was always, I think so. I think it was always in the springtime, but they had Officers Week where they actually made us like really good food. I think they had like roast beef and roast chicken, pork tenderloins. Like, okay, we're going to give you, it was good. It was actually good. The preparation methods were good. Quality food was good. It was kind of like a slap in the face, and we were allowed to eat it, even though we weren't officers. People like myself who worked in the medical department, the civilian employees, I was like, okay, you're gonna give us really excellent, like 5-star food 1 week out of the year, kind of a kick in the face, and then the other 51 weeks are gonna serve us garbage, you know? And people would always be asking, like, oh, what's for lunch today? And I'm like, oh, you know the answer to that. The question is always garbage. You know, there was one nurse used to call dog food, and she would say, like, oh, this isn't roasted chicken, this is yard bird. And we always used to make jokes about the meat. Sometimes the meat we weren't really sure what it was, whether it tasted good or bad. People used to call it mystery meat. um, yeah, this one nurse I worked with, she was out with her boyfriend, and she didn't really, I mean, she wasn't really high paid as a nurse, and she had a long commute, like an hour and a half commute, and heavy rush hour traffic coming to and from work. So she used to, even though she hated it, she used to eat the food there to save money herself. And she was out one night at a real fancy restaurant with her boyfriend in downtown Chicago. And she was like, oh my God, I guess she turned heads from all over the place. She was kind of loud spoken, really abrupt. And she was talking to her boyfriend, and she's like, oh my God, she's like, this is so much better than jail food. And a bunch of people, like, in this just a real fancy restaurant, they had turned around and looked at her like, oh my God. And she didn't explain herself. She really didn't have to. I think a lot of people thought that she was in jail. And, but yeah, I got to the point where they started charging, and even when they weren't charging, they get that to the point. People are like, oh, I think it's time to bring in a brown bag. I'm like, yeah, I'm with you there. And even though I didn't have as much time to cook, um, I didn't really want to have as much money to spend. I was making cheaper meals like spaghetti, but yeah, I got to the point where I just started bringing my own food in. And I'm very fortunate for that, because I know some jails and prisons, they don't want anybody bringing anything in. I think some prisons in jails, they actually make the employees eat the jail food if they're going to eat. Unless you want to go through who can go through a whole 8-hour day without eating, not me. So even though I've done it, but not too pleasant. But yeah, that would really be, I know it depends on the jail. Maybe it was better food, but yeah, our food they served the inmates was just absolutely terrible. And when the economy got real bad, I think the recession hit. When I first started working there, well, the contracted company in the kitchen, they cut staff, they cut out because to have a hot breakfast, they need to get there at like to serve. I think they ended up having like the officers and the inmates serve a cold breakfast. They got rid of the hot breakfast because in order to do that, I think the food service workers were having to get there like 5:30 in the morning to get the breakfast ready by, I don't know, 7:30, 8 o'clock. Not sure what time they ate, but yeah, when the economy got really bad during the recession, they cut off the hot breakfast. They started serving cold breakfast like cereal and fresh fruit. And from what I understand, it's been that way ever since, like 15 years to the day. They're just I guess doing away with it, even though the economy has gotten better. The economy got better back when I left there, and I mean, they do have a commissary. It's like a lot of junk food, like chips and candy. They do eat a lot of because they have microwaves. Or I think they got rid of the microwaves because they were using those as weapons. Somebody actually heated up water in a microwave and splashed it on another inmate as an attack. So I think they took the microwaves away due to the attacks. And but yeah, the inmates were just like taking hot water and pouring it on the ramen noodles. And because they weren't able to microwave it, weren't able to cook it on the stovetop, they were just having to let the noodles sit for like an hour to soak until they became soft, became edible. But yeah, a lot of them eat a lot of ramen noodles. There was a lot of some weight loss in there. Some of them don't eat the food; they lose weight because they hate the food so much. And a lot of them indulge in that junk food and ramen noodles. And I saw a lot of people, and due to being no, some inmates were so bored they were working out, lost weight, but some of them just had no motivation. They were so depressed due to being in jail. They just lost motivation, didn't feel like doing anything, and didn't exercise. So some of them actually, a lot of them actually gained a lot of weight while I was working there. And I didn't realize this one woman I was talking to her, this inmate, she was in for murder. I didn't know it at the time until after the fact. I felt bad talking about steak with her because she murdered somebody and she got like 35 years in prison. I didn't know it. But we were talking about food. She was like, she was talking about all this homemade, home cooked food that she missed. And she was talking about how bad the food was in there. And I said, oh yeah, like I couldn't live without my steak. And she'd go, God, steak, don't even get me started. And then I found out that she was in for like she was looking at like 35 years, which she ended up getting. I'm like, oh my God, I feel so bad talking about that I have sympathy for a crime. But I'm like, oh man, I probably hit a nerve with her mentioning steak. And there was one guy that's 30 years is a pretty long time. There was another guy that was in there for murder, got convicted. He went away for 30 years, and they asked him if he was okay before he left. The mental health staff, they asked him if he was okay, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm just looking forward. I'm just going to serve my time, and I look forward to a steak and a beer when I get out." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, have fun with that." In about 30 years, and one time we did get served roasted chicken. I guess I don't think I was there that day, or it might have been on a weekend or the holiday, but I guess the chicken was raw. So and it was like 100 yards. It was a long haul. They had to haul this food all the way from the kitchen down to the uh, dining room or the cafeteria where we ate, the lunchroom. It was probably about at least 100 yards of a walk to haul all that food down. And I guess somebody realized that, I guess, or a bunch of people realized the chicken was raw. I don't think anybody got salmonella from it. I don't think anybody ate it, but then they got hauled all back into the kitchen, another 100 yards back, and cook it until it was done and bring it back out again. And a lot of times, it was funny, like we would have potlucks a lot. I think we used to have like one potluck a month, but yet one day, like the kitchen staff, they still put out like tuna salad sandwiches. And I told one of the officers, I'm like, "Oh God, like we're having this potluck, and yet they still put this garbage out." And he's like, "Oh yeah, they have to do it. It's within their contract that they have to. If we're having a potluck, they still have to serve us a lunch." And it just sat out there, and nobody even touched it. And there actually were inmates that were suing over the food. They said it wasn't enough calories, it wasn't nutritious enough. Um, they said the food was giving them heartburn, but yet they looked at this one guy's commissary order. He was ordering all this spicy food like nacho cheese Doritos and those atomic, like big red hots, those atomic fireballs. And they had, I guess the newspaper reporter actually came in her news reporter came in to talk to the sheriff about it, and even the news reporter said him and the sheriff, like they couldn't help but crack up looking at his commissary orders, talking about discussing all this stuff. And we didn't do it at our jail. I wish they would have, but for disciplinary reasons, or inmates are complaining about the food not getting enough nutrients. I know there's a county jail next county over. They used it as like a disciplinary thing. It was called the Loaf. What they do is they take I think was it chicken, like processed chicken. This was all processed up, sort of like a molded paste, almost like soybean paste, like it looked kind of like tofu, like soybean paste. But what they did is they took like chicken and all these vegetables, and I'm not sure what else was in it. It was a mystery. It was called the Loaf. Like I said, we didn't have it at our jail, but I think I saw a picture of it online. And it looked so disgusting, but they said that actually was a positive reinforcement. It actually when they did that to inmates as a disciplinary action, it actually got them to straighten themselves out. So, yeah, it would be terrible to have to eat that, but they were like, "Hey, here's all your nutrients, here's all your vitamins, here's all your calories, and you got the sufficient amount of calories, nutrients, and vitamins." But, yeah, it definitely was a challenge to find a good meal. There weren't too many good meals in that jail, and I imagine there weren't too many good meals for the inmates either. But like I said, the food they served us was a little better than the food they served the inmates, but still wasn't that good. And we got a lot of sausage too, like huge, like big breakfast sausage links. It got to a point where I think it was like everyone was like, "Oh, sausage again." And I think they served us like sausage for like 5 days straight. It's like, oh my God. And sausage is high in fat, high in salt. And no wonder the officers were having blood pressure issues. And then they would have like weird combinations. Like I think like one day they served like grilled cheese with clam chowder. And, somebody said like, "Oh, those don't even seem like they go together." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm with you." And I guess that one day one of the food service workers was down there and like, was telling somebody like, "Oh, did you see that the other day? They served clam chowder with grilled cheese. Like, I don't even think they go together." And this one nurse, she saw the food service worker was in there. "Oh, yeah, they do." And she's kind of like whispering to me. She's like, "Oh, you gotta watch what you say, Jeff." I'm like, "Oh, I don't give a shit." But all right, so that's I guess all I have to say about that. Stay out of jail. You don't want to be there. And the food is definitely not plentiful, not too pleasant to eat. So comment, like, share, subscribe. I'm out.